healthcare providers and the business people can't make decisions in isolation of each other, and they need a forum by which to come together and make those decisions.
Dr. Robbins, Jared, welcome to Inside Reproductive Health.
Thanks, Griffin. I appreciate you having me join you. I'm excited to be here.
Your motto could be, I'm not always the executive director of professional societies, but when I am, it's ASRM, because I don't want to call you the most interesting guy, Jared, because I don't like inflating egos that much, but I think it bears a little bit of talking about on the show. You and I had dinner together in Atlanta, and I got to learn a little bit about your life. And I was like, wow, he's like the Dos Equis guy. He said, oh yeah, I used to live in Atlanta. Oh yeah, when was that? Oh, back in the 80s when I was a firefighter. What? Oh yeah, I was a firefighter for 5 years before I went to film school. What? And so can we tell people a little bit about your life before med school, before we get into your trajectory to ASRM?
Sure. So I was did some work mostly working as a paramedic with the fire department in a northern suburb of Atlanta.
What brought you down there? Because you grew up in New York or Long Island?
Yeah, I grew up on Long Island. I always wanted to be a firefighter, paramedic. Long wait to do such in the New York area. Was looking at schools in most fire departments, in order to advance through the ranks, you had to have an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree, depending on how high you wanted to go in the ranks. I always wanted to be chief, and so I knew I needed a bachelor's degree, and I applied to schools. Emory was one of the schools that I applied to. The Firefighter magazine was advertising heavily for fire departments in and around the Atlanta area, and so I applied and needed to pay for school also. I think that was a big concern for me. Is in order to go to college, I had to pay for college. So
you were a paramedic while you were at school?
Correct.
Got it. And why film school?
So I always had an interest in film and arts, and I'm a creative thinker, and I was going to college really for the degree more than for the knowledge, and so I thought I would do something that was going to be really fun. So I was a film studies major with the bio minor, and then as kind of progressing through school, decided, I think really through my experiences as a paramedic, really decided that medicine was going to be the way I went, and so made sure I hit my medical school prereqs, but not really sure that was the way I was going to go when I started the application process, but wanted to make sure I had those prereqs in case I decided that was an avenue that I wanted to pursue.
Did you ever end up working on any films or TV?
Did some short school type programs, but never anything professionally, no.
How did the transition to medicine happen?
So, had a strong interest in science, and so was taking some of those science classes along, in school, made sure, like I said, I hit those prereqs. I was in a fraternity as well. A lot of my fraternity brothers were taking the MCATs. My girlfriend at the time was studying for the MCATs. So I thought I would take the MCATs too, just see how I did, and did well in the MCATs, and just, sort of almost out of fun, applied to Emory and to State University of Stony Brook to see if I would get into medical school, and I did, and had a long, sort of inner conversation, deciding, is this really what I wanted to do? Talk to my friends, my advisors, my parents, prayed on it a little bit, and decided, let's go to medical school and see what happens. It doesn't mean I can't be a fireman in the end, but let's see how medical school goes. So State University of New York at Stony Brook was relatively inexpensive at the time. It's not anymore. But and so I would be able to go there to school and not have to worry about taking out a whole bunch of loans. And so I went to medical school, and I loved it.
So that brought you back to Long Island, and then did you immediately do residency in OB/GYN and then immediately subspecialize, or was there time between being an OB/GYN and subspecializing?
So it's interesting. So obviously, when I went to medical school, I thought at first I didn't know what I wanted to do. My interests were trauma and, trauma surgery, and those sorts of things. And, so I took my, in medical school, for those that don't know, you do in your third year, you do what's called clerkships, where you essentially spend time on the wards in the different fields. And knowing that I wanted to do surgery, and OBGYN is a surgical subspecialty, and this is actually a common story among OBGYNs. I scheduled my OBGYN rotation immediately before my surgical rotation, so I would have that surgical experience. I would feel like, more confident when I walked into the OR to impress the surgeons. I loved OBGYN. I felt like there was a lot of, so one of the things that OBGYN had that surgery really didn't have is that idea of really being part of, really developing a relationship with your patients, being part of the family. And I really love that idea of having that closeness with your patients, with that ability to really impact, someone's life over the course of their life. And so, but I also wanted to be a surgeon. And so, OBGYN really was the best of both of those worlds. You had that ability to be a doctor, to be a part of their family as a doctor, and to also, be a surgeon. And then reproductive endocrinology, which was relatively new, this is now early 1990s, so it's a relatively new field, and there's that ton of creativity, kind of going back to those roots of I was a film studies major. There was that idea of being able to be creative and innovative and really thinking, long term about how to solve problems. And so I was really drawn to that reproductive endocrinology and making families what could be more fun and exciting and rewarding than building families, and at the same time being creative and innovative and being able to do surgery. And so it was really,
I often hear REIs that like surgery say that REI isn't enough surgery for them, that they miss surgery. Do you find that to be the case?
So, I think that the REI world has definitely changed a lot since the 1990s. We did a lot more medicine back in the 1990s. We were this, we started laparoscopic surgery in many ways. It was started by the REIs. And so a lot of that, what we now consider MIG surgery, it was an offshoot of REI. I think that, we've become less surgically focused. A lot of the reproductive endocrinologists out of there, there's still a bunch of us that still do a lot of surgery though. And so I think it's, I think we as individuals have to sort of find our way. ASRM, through the Society for Reproductive Surgeons, actually has a surgical track, a surgical scholars track for reproductive endocrinology fellows. So those fellows that really do want to be more surgically involved can be part of that reproductive surgical tract. And these are programs that have higher volumes of surgery. So it is out there for a lot. I mean, my practice certainly became much less surgically heavy as I got older.
Well, it's a good thing for the fellows and residents to learn about. If you're listening, if you've been on the show before and you're wondering, hey, Griffin didn't ask me that much about my backstory, why not? I don't know, go to film school and be a fire department paramedic for a few years and tell me about it at dinner sometime, because I think it's interesting. So let's fast forward a bit and let's get to the position that you now hold at ASRM, which is a full-time position as Executive Director for the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. And let's talk about how that came to be.
So I went to business school. I graduated from Kellogg with my MBA in 2020, and was thinking about ways in which to really have an impact on our health system. Really, my interest in
why did you decide to do the MBA?
So I really wanted to learn to be more involved in healthcare operations. And I felt like the healthcare system is rapidly changing. Big health systems are not run by physicians; they're run by MBAs and attorneys. But
why an MBA and not an MHA then? If it was healthcare operations that interested you?
Yeah, I mean it's business. It's really these big businesses that are having such an impact on the health system, not just in reproductive endocrinology, but throughout the whole entire health system. For me, getting my MBA was just learning a language, right? I never had any business classes. Again, film studies major, right? We weren't looking at business classes. And so, as a division chief, so I was division director of reproductive endocrinology at Northwestern. And, so much of my job was understanding business. And, Northwestern worked as a dyad. So it was a physician and a business person sharing the role of running these practices. And I really felt like there was a language that I didn't understand. That medicine has its own language, and we know that. And we when we talk to patients, we have to remember that we have to think in lay language and not thinking in medical language. And business has its own language as well. And I just I needed to know what that business language was in order to really be able to effectively run a practice.
And when you say business language, what are you referring to? Financial modeling?
Financial modeling, P&L sheets, even in marketing. I mean, there's just a whole, the way in which people spoke was very business oriented, right? It had its own focus. When they're talking about the price setting and the economic modeling behind that, and when we're dealing with insurance companies, and talking about how to negotiate, and all of that was stuff that I had really never learned. I was a terrible negotiator. I took three courses, and I took 12 negotiation credits at business school. I think that was really important to understand that, and really in looking at the system, even how to do things like how to affect change, how to lead up. These are all business concepts that physicians really never learn. And so I really felt if I was going to be effective at changing the way the health system is, that there needed to be more doctors involved in that. And in order to be at the table, we needed to know the language. And because, we were being told as physicians by these health care business practitioners that we should stay in our lane. You do the doctoring and we'll do the operations. But I felt like how can they do the operations if they don't really understand what we do? And so they really needed to have that physician voice at the table, and until we understood the language, we wouldn't get that voice. And so really I was like going to language school for me to go to business school.
Were there any other physicians in your class at Kellogg at that time?
So Kellogg actually has an interesting program. So first of all, there's a lot of business. So the Executive Health program has a bunch of doctors in it. And then they also have a joint MBA residency program with a couple of the residency programs at Northwestern. I wasn't in any of those. Because I really didn't know anything about business, I felt really like a blank slate. I wanted to do a traditional MBA school. So, Kellogg was like, "Are you sure you want to do this? You don't want to be in the executive program? You're kind of old." And I said, "No, I really want to do a traditional program." So I actually did what they call the Managers program, which is a part-time evening and weekends program where it's typically young managers. The average age in the class is around 27. I was definitely the oldest by far. I didn't have any other doctors, although after I joined the program, a couple of young doctors joined behind me. But it was not a program that was aimed at physicians. It was really aimed at managers. And so for me, it was really getting that basics. I mean, basic accounting, right? Financial accounting and managerial accounting, just sort of those real basics that they may not have covered as in depth in the more senior program.
I want to talk about how that led you to ASRM, but I do think it's interesting enough for the audience to sidebar for a moment on the type of negotiation they taught you at Kellogg, because from what I've come, Kellogg seems to be a greater proponent, or perhaps a louder proponent, of anchoring in negotiation, whereas very often negotiation schools and teachers in negotiation will say, never say the first number, never give the number first. And I've done both in my career a lot, and I see that there are uses for each tactic. But generally speaking, I think it does make sense to say the first number in many cases. What were you taught there?
Yeah, so Kellogg definitely is about, first of all, win-win negotiations, right? I mean, that's a big belief in the Kellogg community is that your negotiations should always be win-win. But they do focus a lot on anchoring. I think that you do, I think anchoring is important because it sets the tone of the negotiation. But, the fear of anchoring is that you could anchor yourself out of a negotiation as well, right? If you think, all right, I'm going to anchor high because I know we're going to settle somewhere in the middle, you got to make sure you're not too high because that could just, anchor yourself out. And so I think that anchoring is definitely a big focus of, and being the first to make an offer, I think is often a really good strategy. It doesn't always work. And, in a lot of, like I said, I took 12 credits. I took a bunch of negotiation classes. It doesn't always, you don't always want to be the first to anchor. There are definitely situations where that may work against you. But, I think that there is definitely a focus on making that first offer and making it realistic.
Negotiation is interesting because you have so much to gain in a negotiation. When you go and buy, if you go and buy a car, you buy a house, you buy a mattress, it doesn't matter. Just by asking, sometimes one question can save you hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars. You couldn't make that money in a 10-second time frame doing anything else. And that's what makes negotiation so valuable. And then on the other end of the spectrum is that sometimes it's negotiation can just really hamper speed. And it's like you want to get out of there. And so anchoring does have to do with that. Sometimes you don't. It ties back to value-based pricing too, right?
Yeah.
Let's use an example outside of medicine so that we're not putting anybody on this spot, but let's pretend we're a web development agency and we are a niche agency for financial institutions. If we're just selling website development, then we're being commoditized against every other web developer. That's an area where we actually do want to do value-based pricing because we want to see how many more loans do you want to sell? How many more credit card applications do you want to bring on? Because we know how to increase those by X%. And so you would want, you do want to do value-based pricing, and you probably don't want to anchor in a situation like that because you want to see what it's really worth to that person because you're going to help them get a certain amount of outcome. And then there's other times where you just want to move as quickly as possible and or not as quickly as possible, but it is better just to have a good position, say this is what the price is, either you want it, you don't, and you can move through engagements more rapidly. Do you have a view on when it should be used?
So I think, to kind of bring it back to kind of the question as to how I got to ASRM, or what did my MBA teach me that brought me to ASRM? I think that negotiations to me was not only learning about how to, work your way through a dealings. It's, in order to be good at negotiations, you have to ask good questions of the person with whom you're working, and that brings you back to that whole idea of values, like what's important to you, where really understanding what's critical to them in their need, so that you can make your offer, to fit what that value structure is. And so it's for me, negotiations was about how to ask good questions about person's values and what's important to them, and where their needs are. And that's what I feel like I have to do a lot at ASRM. Like, my goal is to create value for our members. And that's about, I don't want to say that I'm negotiating with them because I don't, it's not like, again, it is that idea of a win-win, but, it's about understanding where their needs are and what their values are, and developing programming and value based on those needs.
Depends on how semantic we're being, right? If expansive enough a definition, everything's a negotiation. But tell me about the win-win concept, and what did you learn there at Kellogg, and how do you think you're using that principle in your position at ASRM, the win-win concept of negotiation?
Yeah, I think that again, I think we have a very diverse membership, that very interesting and diverse membership, and we need to make sure we're fitting a lot of different needs, right, at ASRM. We're not just an organization of physicians. We're an organization that's actually 50% of us are physicians, and the remainder of the organization are business people and nurses, embryologists, mental health professionals, genetic counselors, and we have this diverse group of people, and we need to be really, make sure that we're fitting everyone's needs. And so, and with limited resources, and so there is definitely that negotiation among. I have to negotiate with my executive team as to what is going to be the next thing that we do. I have to negotiate with the board, right, to make sure that we're fitting everyone's needs, and with members who are who want things done now, or what is who to develop the right programming. I think that there's lots of opportunities for negotiation, but we definitely, I don't want to see any of that negotiation as adversarial, right? I think that my job is for everyone to get to meet everyone's needs here at ASRM, right? And so definitely thinking about ways in which to try to accomplish that with, again, limited resources, limited time, small staff.
I want to talk about what you're trying to accomplish given those considerations. In wrapping up this negotiation side segue, did Kellogg teach you all to use the word fair early and often? Because I forget where I picked that up, but I find that it's perhaps even more for me than it is for the other person, using the word fair when I'm talking to some. Do you find this to be fair? Would you agree that this is fair? When I do that, it makes me scrutinize my interests more. Okay, is the other party really going to gain from this? And then I'm also detaching from something where if it just isn't a good fit for me, that we part ways as friends. And so I find it really, really useful. Did that come up at all?
Yeah, definitely. Again, values, that idea of win-win, fairness, using the term "is this fair" is something that we definitely do a lot at Kellogg.
So I'm getting how you had this interest for really figuring out how the healthcare system works, not just your fertility practice, but really getting a handle on how healthcare works, and that it's inseparable from business in many ways. And in order to understand that language, you had to get your MBA, and that gave you a foundation for being able to run ASRM and being able to bring in this win-win sense from of negotiation and problem solving. But how did it actually be the ASRM position?
So the ASRM position was available. ASRM is an organization I've been involved in over 20 years. I think that it has a great opportunity to have a strong impact on the field of women's health, and it's not just a women's health organization. Let me back that up and say on reproductive health, both for men and women, and from an education standpoint, from an advocacy standpoint, from a research standpoint. But ASRM encompasses everything that has been important to me as I've moved through my career as a reproductive endocrinologist. And so, given the opportunity to lead an organization that has such breadth and reach, was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. I'm really excited to be here. It's been 8 months now. Drinking from the fire hose, really learning about the organization from the inside. I think that I've known the organization. I've been a part of this organization and a leader in this organization for a long time. But being on this side of the curtain has really been eye-opening in terms of just opportunities and creation of opportunities, and it's been really fun. It's been a great 8 months. I'm hoping that it's a lot longer, and we'll see some of the fruits of that work as we get to our annual meeting in a couple of weeks.
And so everyone listening knows you're not doing this remotely from Chicago. You moved down to Birmingham.
I did. I happen to be in Chicago today because I'm going to be at a Chicago meeting tomorrow. But yeah, I moved to Birmingham, and I'm living. Our headquarters are in Washington D.C., but we have administrative offices and campus in Birmingham as well. And because of the fact that so much of our operations happen out of Birmingham, I felt it was important to be closer to those people, and so I'm living in Birmingham now.
I want to hear about the fire hose that you're drinking out of, but this could be interesting ASRM history, because I bet you most people don't know. How did ASRM end up being headquartered in Birmingham, Alabama?
Yeah, we had a leader, a CMO that was part of UAB, and so that's how it became part of Birmingham history. Yeah.
Was this at the inception of the society or years after?
So ASRM has actually been around since the mid 1940s. But the headquarters was actually, it rotated from sort of president to president, and before it became established, with a full staff, and but when it finally got headquartered, they bought a building in the 1970s in Birmingham. So it was that building that started it, sort of headquartered there.
Somebody, you sponsors that do all of these little events for trivia night. Go ahead and stick that one in there for your
I've got a whole ASRM trivia that I can provide, that I do with our board.
Oh, we should do a whole episode on ASRM trivia. Somebody would sponsor it. Anyway, let's talk about. You said you're drinking from the fire hose, which is the case of many leadership positions, and certainly one with societies large as ASRM. What are the things that you're like getting your hands around right now?
Yeah, so I think that obviously I had to learn a lot about our budget, about our endowments. So that was learning a lot. I learned a lot about where the money goes. So that was certainly something we can talk about. Focusing on our meeting coming up, really how the meeting is run. I think that we all go to this meeting. I've been at this meeting every year for almost the last 20 years. And the meeting just happens, right? I mean, we have no idea when we're attending this meeting the amount of work that goes on behind the scenes to make this meeting happen. The numbers of vendors that we have that are necessary in order to make sure the meeting runs properly, from the electronics to the lighting to staffing the rooms. I mean, there's so much that goes on in running this meeting, and I had no idea how much there was and how hard these people work in order to really, the ASRM staff is just unbelievable when it comes to when it comes to running this meeting. And, the entire staff is actually at this meeting, making sure that it runs smoothly. And so, I suggested changes, as because you're involved in some of these changes at this meeting. And to make these happen, I was like, oh, this will be so easy. Let's just do that. Let's just do this. And, the dominoes that suggestion created in order to make it happen. And the staff did. I mean, I came in with this idea that I wasn't going to make any changes because I really just wanted to learn the organization. I came in at the time when it was sort of at the end of the planning of the meeting in January, because the meeting gets planned 18 months in advance. And I was like, oh, but, we should really have more of this at the meeting, and we should really do this at the meeting. And, my staff was like, all right, well, we're just going to listen to this crazy guy and make these things happen. And I think that, learning what actually took to make these what seemed to me to be small changes happen was amazing. And I'm so lucky to have this incredible staff that I work with every day.
I want to talk about a couple of those. You said we could talk about where the money goes. So where does the money go, Jared?
Yeah. So, we have a lot of endowments, right? So a big focus of our money is the Research Institute, right? We've established the Research Institute. It was established in 2019 by committee, and that is to put that the purpose for the Research Institute is to make sure we're getting projects funded that wouldn't be funded through traditional funding mechanisms. So, stem cell research, we know you can't get funded through through the NIH, or we're trying to do nursing research. We have funds set aside for that. I mean, really, things that are very relevant to our field that are going to move our field forward, but wouldn't get funded through traditional funding mechanisms. This year, we're giving over $1 million. I want to say it's close to $1.5 million, but I don't want to overstate the truth. But it's definitely over $1 million in grants this year. And so a large part of our endowment, when you look at how much money we have, a large part of that is committed to the Research Institute in order to make sure that we could do that funding. And in order to really have that endowment fully funded, we need a whole lot more money. Right now, we're trying to only use interest generated from the Research Institute in order so that we don't have to touch the endowment. But we all know what's happening in the financial world right now, and so our endowment is certainly not going to last if the market doesn't turn around. Another big part of our endowment is the Center for Policy and Leadership that recently launched. We're pushing the launch for the Center for Policy and Leadership at the annual meeting this year, and that is a nonpartisan think tank. Right, we know that reproductive policy happens, and there are a few think tanks out there that are helping to inform our policymakers and the public about what the implications of of developing this policy and law. A lot of them are biased in these think tanks, and none of them are really run by reproductive medicine specialists. And so we have put together the Center for Policy and Leadership through the ASRM to be a nonpartisan, think tank to help provide policymakers with data. I think the example that they're focusing on a lot now is data to access to care. So we're helping the military to develop an access to care policy for reproductive medicine, and one of the white papers that we've put out is what would that cost the government in order to do that. So again, this nonpartisan, just information research developing concept. And so that's a lot of where the endowments go. We have some educational endowments. So this money isn't just available for us to use. When we look at our endowment, we have about 2.5 times our operating budget in undeclared funds, but that's fairly modest for an organization of our size. The rest of that, the money that we have sort of as our money in the bank, they're committed endowments. So people have donated that money for specific purposes, and we really can't touch that except for the purposes for which they're, have been endowed.
Do the endowments just come from donor funds? They also come from sponsor funds? How does that work?
Yeah, so some sponsored funds, some donor funds. It's donated money, right? We're a 501(c)(3) organization, and so it's money that's been donated to ASRM for these purposes.
So, but it does, when a company gets a big booth or does a Ruby sponsorship at ASRM, does that ever go to the endowment? Does that go to OpEx is it earmarked for the event? How does that work?
Yeah, so the funds that we raise, say at the expo at ASRM, that's all going towards operating funds.
So you talked a little bit about the things that you want to do, and the Research Institute was established in 2019 before you. There's also the Center for Policy Leadership, but you also said that I want to start doing some things at ASRM, and your staff said, okay, we'll listen to the crazy guy and do what he wants to do. Now, I know what a couple of those things are because the ASRM Med Talks, for example, Business of Medicine. There's probably others that I don't know about. So why don't we start with those two? Tell us what's going on.
Yeah, so let's talk about ASRM Med Talks. One of the criticisms I've heard in my years as an ASRM member is that we should have some small clinical talks, right? Let's focus on what can we do clinically. And so what we conceived of was these short macro learning, short talks, 15-minute lectures on a clinical topic. I wish I had them in front of me. That would have been really smart to have for this meeting. So one of them is disasters in the IVF center, right? So we have someone is going to talk about how to prepare your lab, to protect your cryopreserved tissues in the case of a disaster. We're going to talk about how Kara Goldman is going to talk about how she responded to Hurricane Sandy at NYU when they had to worry about protecting their tissues. And so we're going to do these short 15-minute talks that cross over the different specialties, right? So we're going to have maybe a talk from our urology group, talk from our reproductive endocrinology group, and maybe a talk from the nurses, so that we're covering all the areas.
I'm giving a talk on how to use messaging to engage patients and staff.
Right. So
I could have helped you. I could have thrown you a bone there.
One of our topics is actually how to improve patient engagement. And so you're going to be talking about patient engagement. We're talking the urology group in that same lecture group is going to talk about when appropriate referrals to the urologist and how the urology and the REI should partner to improve patient engagement in that fashion. So again, that way we have a business person, we have a urologist. We're trying to cross over. I think in that same group, we have a talk on the use of EMR, for instance. I think in that group as well. And so this idea, the EMR portal. So this whole idea of how we wanted a group of talks that are clinically oriented, but that span the whole society, so that our business people, our medical people, and our nurses, for instance, can get together, hear a group of talks, and that would spark conversation about ways in which we could practice better. And that was really the idea behind the Med Talks is to create a conversation where all the different areas of our field are able to get together and hear a series of talks that really can interest all of them and spark conversations. Sparking conversations is right next to where the Med Talks are going to be in the exhibit hall. We've developed a networking lounge. Again, one of the concerns and complaints about ASRM is that there's no place to just network with people. There's often like chairs or tables set up in the hallways, but not really, those could often be taken. If you want to sit down with a group of like-minded people, there wasn't really a good place to do that at the meeting. And networking, when we poll people about what the value they get out of the meeting, a big part of that is networking. And that's why it was so important for us to be back in person this year, because the online meetings were great from a content perspective, but it missed that idea of being able to just network with your colleagues. And so this year at the meeting, we've established a networking lounge. That networking lounge will have some programming there. So we're going to do, for example, meet the editors. So you have an opportunity to get together with the editors in an informal setting. But the whole idea is it'll be a place for us to be able to sit down and talk and network with each other without having to go searching for a place somewhere in the convention center. If you wanted to get a group together, you can say, meet us in the networking lounge at 10:30. And I think that is sitting right next to these Med Talks. So you'll be able to, if we just had a really great talk, let's all go chat about it now. We're going to talk about it at the Business of Medicine session too. So we did create a Business of Medicine session, our Association for Reproductive Managers, of which Griff is a member. And I think you're on the board, right? Mm-hmm. Is a board member of that organization. A really important organization to ASRM. It's a group of managers of IVF programs and of REI programs. And we turned to ARM and said, we need to have more business at this meeting. That, I think one of the things that we hear often is that our physicians, and again, I could speak personally about this, don't have an opportunity to learn much about the business of medicine. And we have a lot of business people that come to the meeting. We want to make sure we're creating value for them as well. And so this year we're doing 2 sessions on the business of medicine. Griff is involved in both of them. We're doing a TED Talk session for 5 hours, for 5 sessions, rather, 5 TED Talks. I think it's 5 TED Talks. Might be 3 TED Talks. We're doing a group of TED Talks. Oh my God. we're doing a group of TED Talks on the business of medicine on Monday. So with question and answer sessions, we have some excellent speakers that are coming to give those TED Talks. And then the following day, so that's Monday. And then on Tuesday, we're doing a CEO fireside chat that Griffin's going to be moderating for us, where you have an opportunity to talk to, we have representatives from a variety of different types of practices, from private equity to physician-owned to academic practices, and
private-demic
practices, and we're going to talk about what the similarities are and differences are, and really give an opportunity for people to ask questions of these leaders. In the second half of that session, we're going to do an open brainstorming session about how to create a business of medicine track at ASRM. So really trying to engage our members to tell us, what do you want, right? I mean, I think, I can sit down and figure out what I think you want, but more importantly, we want to sit down and hear from you. Say, what do you want in learning about business of medicine, so that in 2023, we can have a real business of medicine track at our meeting.
I want to introduce philosophical question that I think will be useful as people come to show up and give feedback on the business of medicine track. I'm interested in what you think about it. I remember years before I ever got involved, before I ever worked in healthcare, one of my more hippie cousins, we were sitting around and said, healthcare shouldn't be a business, man. My family who leans a certain way, I'll nodded and I remember thinking, but how can that be? And I think that attitude still prevails a little bit, even in our field. And in many cases, I don't think it's useful. But the first one, the first is that how could it not be a business? There are craftsmen and craftswomen. There are people that are providing services, and there is a race to constantly improve and provide advantages, and by nature that is business. And so how could you ever totally remove it? And the second one is, how much harm are we doing when we pretend that it isn't entire? Because we want to make sure that the tone is right, and we do have the providers certainly have a responsibility to patients. Patients have a certain set of rights, and those have to be protected. But I don't see it as being useful to say that it isn't a business. I'd see that as being disingenuous, almost like abstinent. It's 100% abstinence on sex, because sex can be dangerous. It sure can, but pretending that people aren't doing it often leads to all kinds of perversions. So what is your view on the role of how much business in medicine should be constrained versus should be facilitated in some way like this?
Look, there's all kinds of philosophies about how medicine should be. I don't want to wax philosophical about that. I think right now in the world of reproductive endocrinology, whether you're in the U.S. or abroad, and ASRM is an international society, it is a business. And I think whether that is a government-run business, or it's a private equity-run business, or it's a physician-owned business, we have to, we have an obligation. I think we do, as physicians, have an obligation to meet the needs of our patients, but we have to do that in a way that it's economically feasible in order to achieve that. And I think that the business of medicine is changing over time. I think that that we need to understand as physicians, and not even just as physicians, as a society, we need to understand that we have to negotiate. I come back to negotiations. We have to be able to negotiate with our insurance industry, and we have to be able to negotiate with our media providers, right? With the people whom we're going to buy our Band-Aids from. I think that there are needs that we have as a group of providers in order to be able to give the best quality care, which is what we all want, right? I don't care what type of practice you're in. Our ultimate goal is that we want to give the best quality of care to our patients. We have to figure out a way to do that without, with still being able to make a living and keep we all have employees. I mean, as I have nurses, we have nurses that work for us, and embryologists, and cleaning people that we need to make sure clean our rooms. I mean, I think everyone is equally important, and we need to make sure that we can stay solvent. And the way in which to do that is changing dramatically. And as a society, we need to understand that in order to make sure that we can keep our practices afloat. And that's what we want to make sure ASRM is providing value to help us to do that. As that business of medicine changes, we will continue to evolve. I think that that idea of evolving as a society is really, really important to make sure that we're constantly meeting the needs of our members. And I think right now the needs of our members are to understand how to do better business.
Maybe it's always been a business, right? In the 19th century, somebody still made the bleakers, right? So it was just all business was smaller back then. And some businesses have gotten so good at providing certain needs, whether it be entertainment or food, that the frontier really is medicine. As human beings, we don't want to die and we don't want to get sick. And medicine is what allows us to constantly push the limit of those two otherwise natural limits. And so the things that contribute to that, and you said, it's a fact in reproductive medicine. I think it's a fact in medicine. It's a fact in all medicine, whether it's single payer, whether it's public payer. How many companies are in Israel alone right now working on artificial intelligence? They're not doing it just for, they're doing it as part of, because they know that by innovating this way, that's going to give them a competitive advantage. The people that create laparoscopic technologies, it improves the quality of healthcare. They're doing it because it's going to give them a competitive advantage. And so too, for systems like Engaged MD that didn't exist 10 years ago, improves the quality of the experience for patients. And it's a value for them to enter the marketplace. But what constraints, Jared, need to be in place? Say, okay, you guys aren't running the show. And I think during COVID, we saw pharma companies take a little bit of, it's like doctors eventually had to say, so it's like, all right, slow down. Like, okay, once we look at the research, then we'll tell you it's safe. You're telling us it's safe early, like we'll agree or we won't, but it's us that make the call. So what constraints need to be in place so that it isn't just businesses manipulating the system, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, that's a really hard question. I think that, I think societies like the American Society of Reproductive Medicine is a great, could provide a really great vehicle by which to bring people together to have those conversations, right? I think that.
You and I have the conversation now.
You mean about what? I don't know. Yeah. I think the constraints are going to be really situational, right? I think that. I don't think that. I think that we need to make sure we're meeting everyone's needs, right? And so, I think COVID was a unique and really difficult situation where we were getting lots of different inputs of information, and not everyone was getting that same information, and there was a ton of misinformation. And so, right, I think ultimately it should be, again, I think the physicians and the healthcare providers should control healthcare, right? And it shouldn't be a bunch of attorneys and business people that necessarily tell us how to take care of patients. But we need the input of everybody, right? We need the input of the health. That's where that dyad, if it would work, would really be a good dyad, where you have a healthcare provider and a business person sort of working together. I think that neither one of those, the healthcare providers and the business people, can't make decisions in isolation of each other, and they need a forum by which to come together and make those decisions. I think that the government also there were biases in the government, and COVID was incredibly politicized. And so, what I think is I wouldn't say constraints. I think it's about decision making and being, intelligent and decision makers, and having a nonpartisan, like an unbiased forum, like our Center for Policy of Leadership, being a place where we can bring those leaders together to have conversations, because, I think that that none of those groups should be able to work in isolation of each other.
I'm going through this same I don't know, exercise, I guess you would say, because I want to expand Inside Reproductive Health beyond the podcast that it's been, and it has been serving as a trade media outlet. So I want to make it more of a trade media outlet, like a Wall Street Journal for the fertility field. And that means I've been working on the sponsorship structure, the advertiser structure. I've had very few advertisers on, because I don't want to do an endorsement for most people. I simply can't. So I couldn't sell advertisers until I came up with an advertising structure. But now the audience is there, and I'm ready to do that. But putting in the policy, like, we have editorial control. We're going to cover the news that's at mergers, acquisitions, layoffs, lawsuits. Sometimes it's going to be flattering for businesses. Sometimes it's not going to be flattering for businesses. And you get editorial control over a featured content piece where it says sponsored featured content and nothing else. You don't get to tell me not to write about these other folks, or and I know that we're probably going to write some things about sponsors that aren't great for this company sponsors, and then they just laid off 500 people. So that's one constraint that I view. Is there any place that you think, like, we should have no industry side in quotes representation in this part of ASRM or in this type of policy?
I don't know. I'd have to think about that more. Nothing really, honestly. I feel like disclosure is the key there, right? I think that when there is industry sponsorship, that conflict should be disclosed. But I feel that industry is a big part of our organization, and a big part of our field. And I enjoy talking to the industry and learning from them, from that business perspective. Do I think that industry should be teaching physicians how to practice? No. I mean, I think there's a bias there. But I do think that we learn a lot, even when we get our industry salespeople come tell us about a product. And so, I do think that, as long as that disclosure is there and people have the ability to hear that perspective without understanding that it's a biased perspective, it's a sales-oriented perspective.
Well, this is a great question for you then, and then I'll let you conclude how you want to conclude. But is the scope for disclosures too narrow, Jared? Because I don't remember if it was ASRM or PCRS or both, but I had in my speaker disclosure, I own a client services firm called Fertility Bridge. I'm a paid endorser of Engaged MD. I just felt like people should know those things. And it was either ASRM or PCRS or both that said, take that out of your slide. You don't need that. It's just if you're related to pharma. And I think I was like, all right, if you want me to take it out, I'll take it out. But I still tell people in the talk, because I think they should know. I think they should know any financial interest that I have. So is our disclosure system or our rubric too limited in scope?
So we follow the rules that are set out by the ACCME, right? And so our disclosures for our particularly.
Well, are there rules outdated?
I do think that I think it's important to know. I mean, if you're not talking about something that that relates to Engaged MD, as you mentioned, then maybe it's not as important for me to know that. But I think it's important to know those disclosures. And one of the questions that we ask is, are you going to discuss anything that is involving one of your conflicts of interest, essentially? Right. I mean, that is part of the disclosure. So it may be that they asked you to take it out just because the answer to that question was no. But yeah, I do think that being aware of educators, speakers, conflicts of interest is important, because it creates both a bias that's both conscious and unconscious, right? I mean, I think that unconscious bias is something we really need to think about.
I want to let you conclude, and I'm gonna work hard to make sure this episode comes out before the ASRM meeting. Especially you spent half the episode talking about the meeting, so I want to we might be able to squeak it out the week before, which would be perfect timing. And knowing that the majority of our audience are members of ASRM, how do you want to conclude, either about the meeting to come or just what you'd like to see from them in the coming year?
Yeah, so let me say, first of all, thank you for allowing me to be on. Definitely, I thought we were going to talk only about the meeting, so this was really fun to sort of talk to wax more philosophically around a number of different items and topics. I do think that what I do want people to know about the meeting is that we do have a bunch of new things in the meeting. We talked a little bit about the networking lounge. We talked about the business medicine track that I think is really important. We are doing things to try to appeal to younger members and to creating greater value. So we are having an electronic poster hall this year. So no more printing of the posters. That's all going to be electronic. We'll see how that works.
Like flat screens?
Flat screens, yep. Flat screen poster presentations. Everyone's going to have a specific time to present. So you're not just standing there for an hour. Waiting, hoping that someone's going to find interest in your poster. Smaller groups of poster presentations, but also we're going to have the posters are going to be available throughout the meeting. So if, for instance, you are scrolling through the posters and you see my poster, I don't really have a poster, so that won't happen. But you see a poster from Dr. Robbins or whatever, and you want to speak to that person, you can contact them through the app. And say, all right, I'd like to speak to you about your poster. Can we meet in the networking lounge and chat about it? So that is hopefully going to change the way in which we view our posters. And we're going to get feedback from that at this meeting and continue to adjust that for next year's meeting. We are doing one of the big value that our organization provides, I think, is through our special interest groups. And only 50% of members are part of a special interest group. And so we are trying to highlight the special interest groups by doing what we're calling our all-in reception. And that is going to be on Monday night, where we're going to have our special interest groups and our professional groups and our affiliate societies all present, sort of as a career fair where you get to go around and talk to people about their different special interests and find a place that you might, create more value for yourself in our organization. We talked about ASRM trivia. We are doing what we call live Q-Boost. Q-Boost is a product that we've had available for ASRM for a while now. It's a just-in-time micro-learning platform where you get a question sent to your email every day. And then you get to answer that question. It tells you if you're right or wrong, and then gives you links and other information around that question. I guess my turning off did not work. Notifications. So Q-Boost is this micro-learning platform. You get opportunities. You get a daily email, which is sent to your inbox. You get to answer the question. It tells you if you're right or wrong. If you're wrong answering that question, it goes back into that question bank for you, and you'll get asked that question again later. And then it gives you a bunch of links to further information about that question, in addition to a brief summary. And Q-Boost has been available. It's not many of our members are really aware that Q-Boost is out there. So we're actually going to do live Q-Boost this year, where it's going to be trivia. We're going to do it as a big trivia contest, 5 to 10 questions and with prizes. So really trying to promote that educational opportunity. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention is Camp ASRM. So again, in trying to appeal to young families, again, we're all about building families, and we want to make sure that we're supporting our families. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, coming to the meeting for many young families is having childcare. So this year we're sponsoring Camp ASRM, where that's
a big deal. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, and we've been advertising, and people keep telling me they don't know about it. So
they'll know about it when is it going to be at the convention center? Is it going to be?
It's actually going to be in the hotel in the Hilton, because we didn't have room. We have, with all of our new with all of the new offerings at our meeting, we didn't have any space for it at the meeting itself, but we will be marketing it at the meeting as well. But we want people to know about it so that, if one of the reasons they're not coming to the meeting, I mean, the meeting's in Anaheim, it's across the street from Disney. Come to the meeting, bring your kids, put them in Camp ASRM, and at the end of the meeting, head over to Disney with them, or spend an extra day before or after the meeting, and go over to Disney. And
I wonder if Disneyland being there will mean more people staying through Wednesday. You know how a lot of people often leave Tuesday, or they'll leave Wednesday morning. Or I wonder if Disneyland being there means more people staying through Wednesday because they want to take the rest of the week with their family at Disneyland. But that's in 2020, I was like, how much are in-person events gonna come back? And I said, I think that there's always going to be a need for them. They'll have to be redone in different ways than how they were done previously. And you're coming back to in a big way. This is like Rocky. This is like you're like Rocky IV with in-person events, Jared. You're coming back in a big way. Well, so this episode we will make sure that it airs beforehand. Thank you. Part of the reason why you're covering so much is because you have so much to cover, and there was just so much there was interesting side rabbit holes for me to go down. I hope the audience agrees, but everyone will be able to hear this episode before the meeting, and it should be in great time. Dr. Jared Robbins, Executive Director of the ASRM, thank you very much for coming on Inside Reproductive Health.
Griffin, thank you so much for having me.
The Inside Reproductive Health podcast with Griffin Jones. If you're ready to take action to make sure that your practice thrives beyond the revolutionary changes that are happening in our field and in society, visit fertilitybridge.com to begin the first piece of the fertility marketing system, the goal and competitive diagnostic. Thank you for listening to Inside Reproductive Health.